much for being here. I'm going to let Tim introduce Rick.
Howdy. So I'm going to introduce Rick Francolini, our speaker today. And he is, well, I'm going to introduce him once he came to Orleans, right? So I'm not going to talk about anything he did prior to getting here because I actually don't know as much about that. But since he wasn't very exciting, okay. But once he got here, he has become sort of a local community organizer and activist. And he's been involved in the hydration stations. He's been involved in cannabis. And most recently, he's also been involved in Putnam Farm, and I think that might have been the pathway to get him involved in Putnam Farm. So he's done a great job in helping Orleans build community. And with that, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Rick Francolini.
Thank you, Tim. Cannabis, you just dropped that word like that? Yes, I was a cannabis advocate, still am. I can tell you this, agriculture is far less controversial. That said, there's still some controversy in agriculture. We'll get to that a little bit. But yes, welcome. You know, the first thing I have to share is the fact that I have no official role at Putnam Farm. I am not an employee of the town. I am not a grower with a plot there. I'm not on the Conservation Commission or the Agricultural Council. So everything I'm sharing today is just from my perspective as an outsider who's done a lot on the inside. That said, a little bit about me. I am a tree hugger, a hardcore environmentalist. I love cover crop and soil and play in the dirt a lot, as my wife will tell you, and then remind her that that's actually soil, not dirt. But I care for the soil, I'm obsessed with it. I grow a lot of my own food. There's nothing I value more than locally sourced food. I hate the packaging on produce in supermarkets and the fact that it comes from so far away so often. So got a Cape Cod lawn. I love it when there's moss and mushrooms growing in it. Feels like a natural ecosystem. I most definitely leave the leaves, just saying. Unless I rake them up, in which case I got a 2-year mulching cycle that they're on. They break down beautifully and decompose wonderfully. So, you know, understanding that aspect of my personal DNA, my psyche, is good when I say again that I have no official role at Putnam Farm, but I am very aligned with the mentality that exists over there. And as I first began to learn about it a couple of years ago, the more I knew about it, the more I learned about the growers there, the more inspired I became. Stunning piece of property, 14 acres, surrounded by wetlands and water, right next to the Cape Cod Rail Trail, short walk from Governor Prince, a property that will turn into something someday, and there'll be great access to Putnam Farm from there. Rich with history, it's loaded with native plantings, not too many invasives. And most of all, the land there is earmarked for agriculture, okay? Which is very important. And there are growers growing there right now, but there are room for more growers. And learning about those growers and learning about the potential is what inspired me to get more involved with that property. What I can tell you now is, having been part of it for the past 2 years, Putnam Farm has got unprecedented momentum. We are most definitely at a tipping point. The potential there is going to be realized. And having a group here today live and on Zoom to share that with is just a nice opportunity to get the word out and to share some of the personal experience I've had that have gotten me to where I am here today. So with that said, I think this class is really very much going to be about the people and the partners who are coming together to create this agricultural hub in our community. It's driven by passion, and it's amazing to see what can happen when agriculture as a common denominator, brings together different strengths from different people who all want to see the same final end goal. So with that, Putnam Farm. Putnam Farm was purchased by the town 12 years ago. It had been a farm previously, but for decades had been somewhat neglected and now was becoming overgrown with the natural things that grow when you stop farming. Lots of native cedars and other things of that nature. So to best appreciate the vision for Putnam Farm, it's helpful to understand the context within which it was purchased by the town. Orleans is fortunate in that we already have 2 community gardens, Hopkins and Seacole. Combined, there are 66 plots. Not bad. They are 20 by 20, 400 square feet in total, strictly for Orleans residents and strictly for, growing food for your household. No commercial activity allowed. This is for people who just want to be part of a community that grows food. By comparison, the 400 square feet that make up a plot at one of these gardens, the size of the plots at Putnam are about 10 times that amount, 3,500 to 4,000 square feet. So the Putnam undertaking is a very significant one, and it was designed to be that way so that we could bring commercial agricultural activity to Orleans on a larger scale. Not just about feeding your friends and your family, but more so about trying to feed the community. Local farmers markets, restaurant supply, CSAs, community supported agriculture, whatever. So the vision for Putnam was different, and that is the vision that we're beginning to realize now. So first things first, show of hands, who here has been to Putnam Farm? Okay, so a number of you, but not everyone. Just to put it into perspective, this is the parcel. It's a 14-acre parcel. I've got a pointer here. It's the bottom. Yep. 14-acre parcel, right adjacent to the Eastham Rotary. You hop off the Rotary, Rock Harbor Road. Down here on the bottom, that's the Orleans Courthouse. There's an entrance just prior to the courthouse entrance that brings you right into the center of the property. The Cape Cod Rail Trail is on the right, great access for bikers and walkers. You got Eastham bordering right on the top left over there, right along the town of Eastham. And basically the property, as I said earlier, surrounded by water, surrounded by wetlands, a beautiful piece of property. Now within that property, there's this rectangle that's approximately 6 acres. And those 6 acres historically were farmed. And those are the 6 acres that are essentially available to us for restoration, to restore. Okay? And that is in the process of happening. And the vision is that the perimeter around the outside pretty much remains intact. Nice walking trails, trees, flora, fauna that are established in the area. The center of it, however, is up for restoration. And restoration means a couple of things. It means we're going to be creating plots within that space. And that started to happen here on the left side. And we're also going to be restoring aspects of the ecosystem there are these wetlands, these small wetlands in the middle, which are going to be restored and optimized so that they can contribute to the property, the ecosystem, and the efforts going underway with the growers. So we've got the land, which is a great thing. It's earmarked for agriculture. The next thing you've got that's working in our favor is a management plan. So one of the things I've learned about this journey I've been on with Putnam is that there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. Management plans are one of them. Conservation land, when it's acquired, a management plan is created. It's basically a document that provides you with a roadmap. What you can do, what you can't do, what the vision for the property is. So this way, when you try to restore it, at least you've got some guidelines and some legitimacy for doing so. So a property like Putnam, there are certain things that are allowed, certain things that are not allowed. Bird watching, yes. You know, dog walking, yes. Snowmobiles, no. Hunting, no. But the big yes that we have at Putnam is agriculture. Because there aren't a lot of pieces of property in town where you can go in and cut down trees and turn them into farmland. Trees are of high value, and I get that. We all do. But what's significant about Putnam is the fact that it was purchased specifically with that in mind, specifically to restore agricultural farmland, so we can do it. So the good news is we got this piece of property, and we've got the roadmap. There are certain constraints, and one I'll point out, I highlighted it here so I would remember to mention it, was that when we bought this property, we the town, we accepted what was called a land grant, some state funding that helped pay for it. The good news is it helped pay for it. The flip side of it is when someone else helps pay for it, they get a say in some of the things that, you know, end up in your management plan. And the most significant two components of the state connection to this land is that, number one, because of their contribution, there is no commercial activity allowed on the property, which sounds like a bit of a disconnect because we talked about how there are people there growing for the community. The workaround is basically that you can grow there, but you can't sell there. You can grow there, you can take your product off of the property, and then you can sell at the farmers markets or wherever. So that's one. The other significant component that a land grant brought to the party was the fact that, unlike the community gardens I showed you earlier, Seacole, Hopkins, only open to members of the Orleans community residents, Putnam is open to anyone in the state. And as a result, it means that, frankly, we've been able to attract talent from our surrounding communities. We now have growers there from Wellfleet, Eastham, Orleans, Chatham, Brewster, Harwich, and I'm missing one, but you get the idea. So personally, I see that as a positive because attracting talent is a very important part of the puzzle. So we've got the land, we've got the roadmap. There's one more critical piece of the puzzle that we need. Any thoughts? It's so important that I've got a prize for the person who can tell me what that third critical element is. We've got land, we've got a roadmap that tells us we can clear that land and turn it into plots. What is the critical thing missing? Water is a great guess. People, who said people to work it? We'll talk more about how special this is later. Long pie pumpkin, it's yours. Grown at Seacole. You're not going to find this in Shaw's or Stop and Shop or even Friends. Very unique. Growers. we need growers. Putnam Farm is nothing without growers. It's a great piece of land. It's beautiful, trees, dog walking, bird watching, etc. But without growers, there is no agriculture. And let me tell you, growing is not a small, easy task. As someone who's worked 400 square feet, the idea of working 4,000 is a bit daunting. So we needed to be sure that the growers were going to be there. Which brings us to the COVID winter of 2021. COVID was great for agriculture, all sorts of reasons. Why? Easy. What's that? Supply chain issues, you know, waiting online to get into Stop and Shop and Shaw's, empty shelves. Suddenly all that local stuff that people were talking about for so long, you know, came to light. The folks who could actually pick the food from their yard were ahead of the game. How about just getting outdoors? Everyone wanted to get outdoors. So hanging out at Putnam Farm was a great, you know, the farms, the community gardens came to life. The band was high. People were socializing outside because they couldn't socialize inside. And people had time. They weren't commuting to work. You know, everybody was Zooming, not Zooming. So COVID was really good for agriculture. And it was really good for Putnam Farm. I spent more time at Putnam as a result of COVID. And what was happening at the time is that there were 5 plots and there were 5 growers. And that had been the case for about 5 years. So there was activity there, but I wouldn't necessarily say that there was momentum. And I got to know the growers there, and I spent a lot of time there, and I listened and learned, and most of them, all of them, were half my age, because growing is tough work. There's only a handful of older folks who really get the growing done, and one of them is in this room right now. Leave that unsaid. But the folks out there are young, which is a wonderful thing. And the growers themselves had this vision for Putnam Farm that they wanted to realize. And I listened a lot, and they talked a lot, and I wondered how real it all was. And the decision was made to have a gathering, COVID winter, to brainstorm the possibilities. It was driven by the growers themselves. I came along for the ride. I tapped a bunch of shoulders of the local Aggies I knew in the community, most of whom were my peers, 50s, 60s, 70s. And we teed up this gathering. Again, the vision was brainstorm the possibilities. The reality day of, it was cold. It was windy. Drusy, do you remember? It was cold, it was windy, it was gray. David, do you remember? It was cold. Drusy and David are both in there somewhere. And frankly, I didn't know if we were going to get 5 people, 10 people, 2 people. I just wasn't so sure. Well, I'll tell you, we got nearly 30 people to show up that afternoon, much to my surprise. And we hung out there for 3 hours. 3 hours of people sharing their visions, their dreams, their hopes for Putnam Farm. And most significant was the fact that it wasn't just my folks who showed up, the old folks. The growers and all their buddies showed up. People I didn't know at all. And they spoke, and they were passionate. And they wanted to grow, but they didn't have the land. They couldn't afford the land. And I was like, this is significant. It was a religious experience. The closest to church I have been on a Sunday in decades. And when I left that gathering, I had decided that if we built it, they would come. And I wasn't really sure about it up until then because, you know, I wanted it to be what I thought it could be. I was an advocate for it. But, you know, you need the growers. And the waiting list, which is held by the Conservation Office, was, you know, there was a few folks on it, but it was a little stagnant because there was no momentum. There was no talk about it. It was under everyone's radar. So weeks after this gathering, the waiting list grew significantly. Not only did the waiting list grow, but the sketches got underway, the design plans were created and recreated. Tim Coonihan's, no, those aren't his hands, but his hands are in that meeting. We sat down with John Janelle and sketched out all sorts of possibilities, which then had to go through all sorts of approval processes. And the bottom line was that 1 year after that COVID gathering, the winter of 21, 5 plots had suddenly evolved into 12. This is municipal time. 1 year, warp speed, I assure you, super fast. And I'll tell you this, nothing drives momentum like growers growing. And that's worth repeating. Nothing drives momentum like growers growing. And what we didn't have with the original 5 plots was what I would call momentum. And thanks to those growers and their desire to bring us together on that winter COVID day, we started to create some. And then what happened, this is an important slide to understand because the original vision was that this here on the left, the plots in the red were referred to as phase 1, the original plots. Then we had the creation of phase 2. That was next up. And that we did in relatively short order after that COVID meeting. There wasn't a lot of work to do there. There weren't a lot of trees to clear. It wasn't as massive an undertaking. And the vision was that we were going to do 2 plots year 1. And then during year 2, we were going to do more. What happened was that the 2 plots went really well, construction-wise. And we had so much momentum and so much enthusiasm that the additional 5 plots were also created more quickly, more efficiently than frankly ever imagined. And then, although the original plan was to only bring on 2 new growers, there was a lot of debate about maybe bringing on 5 more, 7 new growers. But there was pushback on that because, you know, folks, there's town employees, and we'll talk about that, who have to manage this property and oversee it. And there was concern that it would be too much growth too fast. 2 felt manageable, 7 felt overwhelming. But ultimately, the decision was made to bring on all 7 at once. And what that did is that put us ahead of the game by a full year. Because folks who thought they wouldn't get a plot up here until next spring actually got onto those plots this past spring. One of them's in the room now. The other one's allegedly coming, but you never know with growers. We'll see. Love them though. So we brought 7 people on at once, and as I said, nothing drives momentum like growers growing. So this past year, so much momentum has been created because there are so many growers now that are growing. We went from 5 to 12, 7 new ones, actually 8, because this plot here, Karen Baker, filled in someone who left. So we had 8 new growers on the scene, first-year growers at Putnam in 1 season. And the reason that's so significant, and the reason that the momentum is so significant, and that the reason that getting a year ahead of the game was so significant was because although we have 12 plots now, there is room for 20 more. Now, on record, the video is running. This is not yet approved. For anyone in the Conservation Commission community who might be listening. This plan is not yet approved. However, it was created thoughtfully. It was created with a clear understanding of what the roadmap allows us to do and not to do. But it was also created with a vision that allowed us to optimize the potential that Putnam Farm represents. And as you can see, that lower left-hand side, here are the 12 plots right now, okay? That rectangle we talked about kind of sitting in the middle of the property. And then you've got your halfway point where the W is. That's the well that's coming. We'll talk about it. So what's important to understand about this is that the plots that are in existence now are serviced by municipal water, drinking water. Municipal water that comes in from Bridge Road that's down here in the lower left, those little, that blue irrigation line, that's the water system, okay? And that was originally meant to be somewhat temporary back when they built the first 5 plots. It wasn't an infrastructure that was created to support 32 plots. So now, as the momentum grew, the good news was that we knew that the municipal water would allow us to service 12 plots, but it wasn't going to allow us to service 32. And back to the roadmap, there had originally been a well on the property, and the plan called for restoration. There had originally been power on the property. The plan called for restoring power. So, you know, it was always understood that there was the opportunity to do all of this. Now the vision was starting to come to life. And since municipal water is expensive, it's drinking water, not the best thing to be irrigating with anyhow. A lot of resources go into creating it. It's not necessary to pay for it, it's expensive. And we know that there was good water under the ground at Putnam that could provide us with the well that we plan to install. So basically where we're at now is that we've accomplished a bunch with the restoration of those 12 plots. We are teed up for a lot more. And where we're going to go next in this class, this presentation, is we're going to talk about how we got part 1 done and what part 2 and beyond looks like from an executional standpoint, from an approval standpoint, from a challenge standpoint. So with that, I'll pause for one moment and say, everybody with me so far? We good? Does anyone have any questions they would like to just throw out for clarification before we get on? We got one right here.
Who would pay for the electricity to run the pump?
Great question. So currently, the plot holders themselves pay an annual fee. It used to be $250 2 years ago. Then we had a drought. Not nearly as severe as this year's drought, but we had drought number 1. And so the price for the water increased to $500. Okay. So basically, the user fees were in essence covering the costs associated with providing water. Once we move over to well water, although none of this will be absolutely official until it happens, but I've had a very talented engineer who crunches numbers and gallons per minute and electrical costs, more so than I can do. He also happens to be the IT guy here today. Thank you, Tim Cunahan. The vision is that the cost for water once we have a well connected to the grid, is going to decrease significantly. So, that's a skeptical eye roll. You look like my wife. These facial expressions. What do you mean? You don't believe that? It takes very little energy to operate the pump for a well. So the vision is that there will be more than enough money. It will be a savings once that infrastructure investment is made. The user fees are likely to remain intact, but not increase. You know, that's kind of the vision right now. And that the differential between the actual energy costs and the user fees can go into a dedicated fund to help sustain the property going forward. Any other quick questions before we move to the next phase? We got one right here.
A wealthy garden group took me and the group to a blueberry farm. Was that around this area?
The blueberry farm, I believe, is in East Ham, I think.
Yes.
And that's Bob Welch or Wells, Bob Wells. I know he has a farm up there.
But it's not within this area.
No, it's not part of this. It's not part of Putnam Farm. It's not far away because it's right in East Ham, and Putnam Farm is right on the East Ham border. But that would be a different farm.
That's what I thought. But is that still in operation?
As I know it, it is still partially in operation. I think he takes that land and sublets it to some growers, as a matter of fact. A Putnam grower last year, James Rosado, actually did some growing on that land in addition to the Putnam land. Okay. All right, so on to the next chapter. How do you get things done? I would suggest that there are three key pieces to the puzzle at Putnam. There are three entities that have an influence on the approval process, on the decision-making, ultimately on the execution. First and foremost, the property is overseen by the Conservation Commission. I've learned a lot about conservation commissions during this journey. The first thing I've learned is that it is a big commitment. All volunteers, every Tuesday morning for hours in meetings, not to mention the site visits other days of the week, not to mention the homework once you get back from the site visits, reviewing dozens and dozens of pages of documents. It's a heavy lift. They have to be trained. They have a legitimate responsibility, and they take it, as you can see, pretty seriously. This is not a lighthearted group. They are visiting phase 3 to be, making sure that we really want to do this, okay? Even though the management plan says this is what we want to do, they have to be sure, and that's fair. It's their job. So you got the Conservation Commission, the group of volunteers. Then you have a town employee, the conservation agent. His name is John Janelle, this guy right here. The guy in the blue with his hands out for those on Zoom. That's John Janelle. He and Christina Smith are a department of 2, and they've got a lot on their plate. They and the Conservation Commission spend a lot of time with regulation and mitigation. As I said, a heavy lift. Finally, on the far left over there is Drucy Henson, who happens to be here today. She is a liaison from the Conservation Commission to Putnam Farm. So you've got 3 pieces of the puzzle. You've got the Conservation Commission themselves. You've got the town employee, the conservation agent, and then you also have the Agricultural Council. Now, the Ag Council does not have as much authority as the Conservation Commission. Can you see why? Compare. Ag Council, Conservation Commission. Who would you entrust with your land? The guy on the left, we got a pair of of Ag Council chair people here. The guy on the left was the chairperson for decades. His name is David Light. He recently took an early retirement package. We moved him out. We brought in the new guy, Peter Jensen, on the right. Their role is advisory. Oh, and David Light is in the audience today. Good to see you, David. My octogenarian agricultural mentor and hero. The Ag Council plays an advisory role. They're all Aggies. They're all for agricultural restoration. Certainly they have some of the same biases I have, but they want to do it in a sustainable, responsible fashion. And they're very thoughtful about their recommendations. They make those recommendations to John Janelle, who then takes them to the Conservation Commission. And at the end of the day, the Conservation Commission has to give the yes or the no. And in addition to Drucy, the liaison that I pointed out from Conscom, and John, who is the town employee, there's another liaison member, oops, wrong way, and that is Steve Ellis. Steve is on the right. Steve is a member of the Ag Council, and he is the liaison from the Ag Council to Putnam. And the liaisons have played a critical role in the success and the momentum, because not only have they been advocating for the property, but they've been a support function to John. John, town employee, is stretched, understaffed, overworked. And one of the concerns about restoring too many plots too fast, it was that there was going to be too much for John. Fair enough. But when people like Drucy and Steve Ellis in particular stepped up, and he has been a man on the scenes, interacting with growers, getting their feedback, troubleshooting, making it easier for the town to do their job. So those are the three folks. Those are the three entities that come together for the approvals and the restorations and the planning. Because ultimately, what's going to happen is we've got to get to a point where we're going to take something that looks like this before and turn it into this after. There's a lot of work to be done in clearing that property and getting it ready to go. And at the end of the day, the individual who is making that happen is John Janelle, the conservation agent that I've spoken of. John Janelle is a municipal rock star. I will tell you that working with him, watching him, learning from him, for me, has been a tremendous experience. He is relatively quiet, soft-spoken, unassuming, but when he gets passionate about something, he knows how to get things done. And he has been getting it done at Putnam by leveraging relationships, partners, the trust he's built with others, various members of the community, and very importantly, did I tell you? There's no budget for any of this. Towns historically Orleans has been pretty darn good with its conservation trust partner at acquiring conservation land and saving conservation land, which is a great thing. Not quite as good about investing it after the fact. So although there's a management plan that calls for lots of things, there's no budget line that says, okay, here's how we're going to do this. We're going to pay for this with that and this with that. So the first three phases, phase 1, 2, and 3 of those 12 plots were basically done with a lot of ingenuity and honest shoestring. And I'm going to show you how. And then we'll show you when we get to the point that suddenly, you know what, we're going to need some hard cash to get this done. So first things first, those trees had to be cleared. I was envisioning chainsaws and firewood and chippers, not John. John had a partnership with the tree guy who was going to not cut those trees down. He was going to come in and transplant them. And I'm not talking like the transplants that I transplant. I'm talking like 15, 20-foot trees. That property is a living nursery. And when farmland gets abandoned for a couple decades, things start to grow. Eastern red cedars, big ones. That's a big succession farmland crop, if you will. All these things I've learned, right? So they have value. And instead of just cutting them down and getting rid of them, John finds a partner. This partner comes in, they tag all the trees they're going to keep, and then they set up a client who's going to buy them, and they pluck them out, and they ship them away. We get them moved, cleared from the land at no cost. We save them in the process, and there's enough residual credit for us to do some other things, moving them around as we want to, enhancing some of our other gardens at Seacall. And quick little show of photos that will demonstrate how it's done. First things first, a short video. Check out this toy. A little different than the transplanting I do on my property. But man, this would be a fun toy. Come in with machines, they pluck these things out, and then they drop them into big burlap bags. They bundle them up. A bunch of them, I think about 15 to 17, if I remember correctly. Put them on an 18-wheeler that barely fit into the property. I thought it was going to sink through to the water line. And off it went. Headed to Martha's Vineyard via the Woods Hole Ferry. That's where these went, where someone with a lot of land and a very large budget purchased them, and where they are now living happily ever after. Pretty awesome. Makes you feel good, especially as a tree hugger, saving what you can, right? Then they came in with smaller machinery and they transplanted a bunch of things where we had to put the fields. Viburnum, bayberry, these beautiful bushes and shrubs that are growing that weren't growing in the right spot. So we plucked those out and we pre-planted them in what is being created, what is going to be a hedgerow. If you see that line of wood chips, there are several hedgerows created on the property by design, where the ultimate vision is that this is going to be a 15-foot thick wall of growth. Native trees, native shrubs, native perennials that are blossoming and blooming throughout the year, creating habitat for all those beneficial insects, attracting pollinators, providing a wind break, because it can be very windy on that property in the winter especially, and ultimately contributing to the ecosystem. Because it's not just about restoring the plots that we're creating, it's about restoring the entire property so that it's a thriving, healthy ecosystem that attracts all the beneficial creatures and critters that help growers grow. That's what's happening at Putnam right now. And that's one piece of the puzzle. We also got a couple of apple trees out of the deal for Seacall Farm, plus a couple of the transplants that made it from Putnam to Seacall as well. All of that was valued at approximately $5,000. And that was money that wasn't in the budget line, but it allowed us to get the first phase of that clearing done. Next up, another partner, our own Department of Public Works, DPW, the guys who, clean the streets and do all the stuff that they do to keep the infrastructure of the town running. They work with John to some degree. I haven't really figured out how, but basically, they've got their own job to do first. And when there's lulls or gaps or a little bit of time, they'll squeeze in side jobs for John. That's why the relationships matter. The trust matters. And the DPW has done a heck of a lot at Putnam. This is Tim. I don't know his last name, but he's on the scene a lot over there now. Whenever he comes, we're happy to see him because they're doing something to move us forward. After all of those Transplantable trees got cleared. The DPW came in and they cleaned up some of the remaining scrub that had to be cleaned out. There was a bunch of stumps that had to be removed. They did so with their machinery, which is great. And then ultimately, there was that English oak, that big English oak in the background that had to come down. And I did say I'm a tree hugger, but you know, it had to come down. It was a little controversial. There's always a little controversy somewhere. But the bottom line was that this was part of the vision, it was part of the plan. And the good news is that there's lots of English oaks around the perimeter of the property. So this one came down thanks to the DPW, but we made really good use of its parts. Nothing was wasted. Those branches, a lot of those branches turned into fence posts, which were installed around one of the plots. One of the growers made fencing a priority, so they got put to use there. Other branches were inoculated with shiitake plugs. Did you know that if you inoculate plugs into the right wood, you can grow mushrooms for food? That would be that photo right there. And then there was the trunk. That 7-foot trunk was saved. And there was a vision for it, which is in the process of being executed. This is Alex Emmons. He lives in Wellfleet. He came down to Putnam to saw that trunk into 3 pieces, 2 end cuts and a center cut, so that we could ultimately have it for benches on the property. He was scheduled to be paid for his efforts. When he got there and finished the job and learned about what was happening at Putnam, he didn't accept payment. He wanted to contribute. He wanted to be part of it. He had the gear and the expertise to get it done. Great guy, very nice of him to do that for us. Those pieces get milled, well, sawed is the proper word, I've learned, Sawyer, not milled, sawed. And then they get dried, as they did for an entire year, bundled on the property. And then recently, thanks to a couple of studs at pod number 11, who hauled it into place, well, I worked the level. I made sure it was really even, or just properly pitched so the water would run off. And now the first of 3 benches was just installed about 2 weeks ago underneath this English oak overlooking plot number 12. So, you know, a lot of sensitivity goes into the resources when they need to be removed. And then anything that doesn't get used turns into wood chips. Organics, as we call them. Organics are really valuable to growers. Leaf mulch, compost, wood chips, organics are everything. Okay? Speaking of organics, I don't have a prize for this one, but take a look. What do you think that is? Any guesses? What is that? Nobody? Okay, I'll tell. Who said that? Good thing you already won. It is compost. It is compost, but more specifically, it is weedy compost. Compost in which the weed seed was not killed because it was not properly heated to the temperature necessary to kill weed seed. So, although the DPW and John Janelle and all folks with good intentions thought they were doing a good thing by bringing compost to the growers at Putnam at no charge when available, the reality was that compost didn't get touched because no growers want to introduce weedy compost onto their plots. Good news is that 2 years earlier, we had a meeting with the DPW, and a group of us got together to talk about the restoration that was coming at Putnam Farm. And we talked about how the quality of the compost really would matter and that compost would be a really valuable resource. And they agreed to take it up a notch. They started monitoring the temperatures weekly. They still are. They heat it properly to get it to the point that They break down those weed seeds so that the compost is truly valuable, made from the waste that we drop off here at the transfer station. Then it gets screened up on the hill at the transfer station, and then ultimately turns into that black gold that growers do love, that we do make available as we can for their use at Putnam Farm. And that same compost is used to do the restorations now because of the fact that we have it available to us and we can use it for restorations. We didn't have that for phase 2, those first 2 plots I showed you, phase 2, but we did have it for phase 3 when we had 5 new plots. Those 5 plots took about 320 yards of compost. So that would result in that. Market rate of that compost, about $16,000. Would it cost $16,000 to buy that and truck it in so that we could create the foundation upon which growers could grow? And the fact that we had that compost ready to go for phase 3 is the reason, it's the reason that we were able to get growers on the plots sooner rather than later. And that same compost is also available to folks who live in Orleans, because it's right at your transfer station. Black gold right there with the wood chips behind it. We're very fortunate to have it available to us. So then after that, the Department of Public Works comes in and they finish up the job. They do the trenching, they have to run the irrigation line, they take care of that. Because every plot at Putnam has its own hydrant, their own water supply, which is monitored. Everyone kind of has to make sure that they're using water responsibly, and that's how it works. So then, the next partner that comes into the scene is the NRCS. As you heard, we had about $5,000 worth of value from the Dale tree moving people, about $16,000 worth of value at no cost from the DPW for the compost they created. Next up is the NRCS. They are a division of the USDA, and they're all about helping commercial growers grow more responsibly environmentally. They're big into no-till, they're big into crop rotation, they're big into organics and mulch. They're really big into working with the ecosystem. What they did for us that was significant is they have engineers and they have conservationists. The engineering team, one man in particular, Manuel Diaz, this guy on the right, made a visit to Putnam after about a year of nudging and patience and nudging and patience, because the truth is they're really focused on larger commercial operations, but they did come out to Putnam early on. They had grown, they were attached to what we were doing. They supported it. They just had to fit us into the cracks. They made it out to the property. They did the work necessary to assess it. And ultimately, they created a plan for us, an engineering design plan for a fully optimized 32 plots, which would then allow us to get the drilling done for the well. We didn't have to pay for the design work. We didn't have to pay for the design of the vault that was going to house the water that allows us to have water year-round for the first time. There's going to be one hydrant now where water is provided year-round. So all of that happened at no charge. It was about a $6,000 value at this point. So we got the $5,000, we got the $16,000, we got another $6,000 for a $25,000, $27,000, $28,000. We're doing well, but at this point, we need some money. We're not eligible for NRCS money, even though it exists, because they can't give it to towns. We're a town. And they can only give it to commercial operations. And as you learned earlier, we're technically not commercial. But we got their resources and we got their guidance. And that's when we turned to the Community Preservation Fund. For those who are not aware, there's a bucket of money that's available on an annual basis in this community that supports certain things. Outdoor recreation is a category that can be supported. And this is infrastructure that can be paid for through a community preservation grant. So thanks to the Conservation Commission asking for the grant, we've got $70,000 teed up this year, which has been approved, to install a well and to connect to the Eversource power grid. That is going to be the game changer that allows us to continue rolling out this property. So now that we have the money to do this, the folks from the NRCS, Manuel, brings in his partners from Western Mass. And this happened about 10 days ago. After begging for rain all summer long, the day that the well drillers came was the same day that we had 2.5 inches of water in about 2 hours. And that was my view through my windshield when they pulled into Putnam parking lot. It was pouring, but they showed up. They showed up. Manuel forgot his rain gear, so he put that garbage bag on instead, that white garbage bag, and borrowed my umbrella. But he was there, and they drilled. And they drilled what is called a monitoring well. They took test samples of the sand to know what sort of granularity they were working with. They were looking for the right depth, the right opportunity. Ultimately, they drilled some more, and ultimately, the results were a good one. We've got water, plenty of it, about 25, 30 feet down. That's step one. They're done with their part. Eversource is going to come in and they'll be connecting us to the grid in the months ahead, which will allow us to have the power for the pump. And there will also then be a final well driller that comes in to do the installation. So by this time next year, we're going to be on well water, which will be a great thing. And we'll have the opportunity to continue to evolve. The other thing that the NRCS does is conservation oriented, because not only did they provide the designs we needed for the engineering, they also provided us with a couple of things. Number one, they'll meet with the individual growers and they'll do consultations. This is a much smaller scale than they typically work on, but nonetheless, this is, a real opportunity for the growers who are interested in capitalizing. On top of that, they also created for us a conservation plan. And this is a conservation plan that is a plan for the entire property. If we were to steward this ecosystem, to optimize it for its flora, for its fauna, for its benefits that it can bring to the agricultural community, what would we do to it? It's a roadmap. It's a roadmap as far as execution is concerned. It's also a roadmap for potential funding. And although our selectman just left because he had another commitment, we're talking to the selectman about the possibility of getting some funding into these budgets so that we can start to actually invest in our properties as opposed to just acquiring them. So we've got a real nice starting point, which has recently been complemented by the Mass Audubon, because we had a visit just about 10 days ago from Ian Ives on the right, who is in charge of the long pasture sanctuary of the Audubon. He has done about 22 wetland restorations. And I pointed out those wetlands in the middle of the property a little earlier. Those are wetlands that we would like to restore. Not overmanage, but clean out the invasives. Clean up as needed. I learned from Ian that there's a term called hydro period. It's important to know the hydro period of your wetland. And that refers to how many months out of the year the wetland is actually wet. And a wetland that's wet for 6 months out of the year can support different life, different ecosystem than a wetland that's wet 11 months out of the year. And it's quite likely that his recommendation is going to be that we manage those two wetlands in two different ways, which will create different opportunities to attract the beneficials that will contribute to the health of the ecosystem. So that is in the works. Those little wetlands in the center are the ones we're talking about, but it speaks to the holistic nature in which we are looking at this property. Then there's our friends at the Orleans Conservation Trust. These guys are partners. They bring tours there. They bring people there. They show off the land and what we're doing there. It's what they believe in. They maintain birdhouses there. These are for bluebirds. This one's for a kestrel. This guy right here in the middle, underneath that, that's self-proclaimed bird nerd Mark Faraday from the Audubon. If you want to hear someone sing praises of the ecosystem that exists and how excited he is about the transformation underway at Putnam because of the habitat that it's going to create, that is a different habitat that doesn't exist much and they're going to attract other birds, go visit him up in Wellfleet. He'll talk your ear off. He's very into it and a great advocate. This is Elspeth Hay. So Mark has a show on WCAI. Elspeth Hay also has a show on WCAI. She came to collect a bunch of the acorns from that English oak that were taken down because she is writing a book on acorns. Go figure. You thought I was a tree hugger? She is a tree hugger. And what I basically learned is that acorns are food for people. They just have to treat them properly and, but they're free to harvest, they're available, and she's going to be writing about it, so stay tuned. This is Glenn Higgins. He's our bee guy. We're looking at bees very differently now because although he's got honeybees working there now, we both realize that native bees, there are hundreds of bees to learn about, and native bees are going to be what does the heaviest lift for us is going to be the native bees, if we can attract them to land. Then you've got Aggie friends like the Norges, Gretel and Jeff. When you need them to come in and take down the cover crop, he's got the tractors to get it done. It's great to have people who are willing to step up in the community like that as the kids watch. And then there are the walkers, the dog walkers who interact with the community, the runners, the parents with kids on sunny days, the parents with kids on rainy days, the teens being inspired by growers, and then enjoying a picnic from the local harvest thereafter. Folks from the Council on Aging in Eastham, they just bust them in. We had a great visit. Anyone who visits Putnam Farm is inspired by what they see. Nobody leaves there underwhelmed, which makes it such a great place to host. These are the interns, dietetic interns, part of a rotation that's run by a woman in town who basically makes agriculture an important part of her syllabus. And this was the Easter egg hunt this spring for the very first time held at Putnam Farm, bringing a whole new world of young people and their families to the farm. And this is a plot that became overgrown because the person who won it got in over his head when his business grew and he couldn't get staffing, and then he fell ill and it was a mess. It needed to be cleaned up. Volunteers stepped in, knocked it out in a day, and those volunteers were then able to hand that plot over in good shape to our two newest growers. And as I said earlier, and I'll say again, Putnam is nothing without the growers. The growers are everything. Growers fuel momentum like no one else can. And that's why we have that momentum, and it is about the growers. Crystal and Ryan, second year in, their plot from year 1 to year 2 has been remarkable. I cannot imagine. They have made so much progress. It's one of those plots that has such an aesthetic appeal while growing such a diverse amount of food. It's super inspiring. Blake and Jessica from Wellfleet, they are growing flowers. They are selling them in Provincetown. They are selling them in Wellfleet. They are selling them at the Friends Marketplace. Alex won the lottery. Wasn't sure he was going to say yes. He went back and forth 10 times. He decided to take the plunge. I don't think we're ever going to get rid of him. He's extremely happy and doing a great job. Karen Baker, plot number 4, told me that since she was 4 years old, she's wanted a potting shed. Now she has one. Amendments being brought into plot number one, you've got to constantly amend your soil. And that is what these guys do because they take great care of their soil because it matters. My friend Matt, nobody builds beds like Matt. Amazing beds, which are built for the long term and are an inspiration not only to me, but to other growers. This is living mulch. That is clover planted amongst the corn. The clover protects the ground. It keeps the weeds down. It puts nitrogen into the ground that the corn needs to grow. Verticals to go high. Potatoes growing high. A fig tree that has been in many generations of my mother-in-law's family, which has now found a new home right here at Putnam Farm. We'll see how it does. And there are dads who are helping and moms who are helping. More dads, more moms, grandparents and moms and kids and food. Lots of it, and flowers, and more food, and flowers. And at the end of the day, radishes early in the season, pumpkins late in the season, harvests that are available for the folks who are looking to buy locally sourced produce. Because many of our growers are selling at the Orleans Farmers Market, the Wellfleet Farmers Market, the Provincetown Farmers Market. Week after week. James Rosato, Aaron Hurst, these two guys were two of the original growers 6 years in. They're still here. Their perseverance is one of the reasons that we have Putnam's momentum that we have today. And you also have vegetables growing, being sold in random spots throughout the community because of the fact that people have a place to grow. This one's on Brick Hill Road. And when the growers aren't growing, sometimes they're just hanging out together and enjoying their harvest together. And when you're there late in the day, as I am sometimes, and the harvests are winding down and there's some leftovers to be had, you occasionally end up with bouquets of flowers that you can bring to your friend at that dormitory they call the terraces. It's really just a dormitory for older folks. And you can surprise your mother-in-law with flowers, or you can surprise her buddy Lou with flowers, or you can surprise my birthday buddy Ann with flowers. Ann and I share a birthday, January 24th. She'll be 95 this January. She told me that that was the first time anyone ever gave her flowers for no reason. So thank you to Blake and Jessica who provided those flowers. And with that, we will pause for a second, and I'm going to introduce our next two speakers. Because this would be nothing, as I said, without the growers. And two of them are here with us today. The first is a guy who very much wanted a plot for phase 2, but his name did not get pulled in the lottery. I was bummed because I knew that he was the sort of person we needed at Putnam. He was a passionate, hardworking, experienced gardener, and if he had land to work, he was going to rock it. Unfortunately, his name didn't get pulled, which meant it wasn't going to be a year, it was going to be 2 years, and that was one of the motivating factors that had me advocating for getting more growers growing faster. As a result of that decision, he got a plot in phase 3. He's been growing there since March. His name is Matt Milan. He's a dear friend and awesome grower. I'm going to introduce him now. Hello, Matt. Here's a microphone.
Do you think I need the mic?
Yes, because the Zoom.
Oh, okay. People are listening on. Oh, geez. Yeah. So I guess I'll just gonna do a really quick, just my story growing, and then I'll get into how it connects to Putnam. So for whatever reason, when I was 19, 20 years old, I got my first apartment in Washington, D.C. I really wanted to grow vegetables. And I met this guy who he said, there's a group that they grow on unused rooftops in the city. I never was able to meet up with that group. But I realized the apartment building next to mine, I could hop from my rooftop to theirs. And I told my girlfriend at the time, I said, I'm going to grow some vegetables up there. She says, isn't that illegal? I said, yeah, well, I'm not growing anything legal. It's tomatoes, lettuce, whatever. So I started there. And from that point forward, every summer and spring, no matter where I lived, I grew as many vegetables as I could. I never really looked at it as sort of a career path, although it is my career now. And I kept growing it. And then I met a guy. I tried to get on the Brewster Community Garden list. I couldn't get a plot. And the guy called me up and said, hey, I see that your name somehow keeps getting passed over. You're not getting a plot. Why don't you farm my land? So that started kind of a long, enjoyable, but difficult journey growing on other people's lands. And that's good, but usually I was basically a modern day sharecropper. So I would do labor for them. I would do all their landscaping. I never got the best of the deal. I always got the worst of the deal. So I built a Wallapini in Brewster, which is essentially a basement with a greenhouse on top. So I dug an 8-foot deep hole, 20 feet by about 14 feet. And that keeps it from freezing in there. That's where I started all my plants. I was growing kale, lettuce, all that stuff for the winter. And long story short, the guy that I was on his land, he was a very difficult guy to deal with. I was landscaping 2 acres for him, cutting the lawn twice a week in the summertime. Nothing I did was enough. And I was looking at land prices. I thought maybe I can swing getting a house soon. That was in 2018, 2019. And then COVID started. And as we all know, home values went through the roof. So I realized it was keep sharecropping basically and get kind of abused every day by this guy or leave Cape Cod. I met Aaron Hurst at the farmer's market, who was a Putnam grower. He happened to just be the stall next to me. We had a lot of similarities. We were both 30 years old at the time. We both been growing most of our adult life. I said, hey, where is your spot? He said, oh, it's at Putnam. It's a community garden area. Oh, that's interesting. And he said, yeah, it's actually, I said, do you have to live in Orleans? Because I lived in Brewster at the time. He said, no, you actually only have to live on Cape Cod. I said, oh, I got to get on that list. So as Rick said, I got on the list. And I knew I had to leave the farm I was on. It was a pain. And, but I also knew I was going to farm for the rest of my life. That's what I wanted to do. I'd started making real money and I didn't get pulled. So that was last fall. And I basically said, this winter I'm moving because I want to farm. I can't stay at this place where I'm at. And Rick pushed very, very hard to get them to open up more plots. David Light, who was is in the crowd. He was on the agricultural committee, and they were kind of deciding, should we do 1 or 2 more plots? How soon could we do them? Could we do 4 or 5? And I went to every meeting where there was going to be a vote, and I would tell them the same story that I've told you guys. And I said, look, there's a lot of young people who really want to work the land and are good enough to do it. We can add to the food security here. People can have meaningful jobs and careers that they actually enjoy, which is somewhat of a rare thing these days. And so credit to the town, to the Agricultural Council, the Conservation Commission, they decided to do 5 plots. They were only going to do 2 or 3. And there were just some minor things they had to figure out. And I amongst many other people, encouraged them, get as many plots as you possibly can. Stretch ourselves as thin as we can, because there's a lot of people who really want to keep working the land. And for me personally, I was gone if I didn't get a plot that spring. So you can put, like a family member on the list. I put my name, my mother's name, and my father's name, and my mom actually got pulled. So thanks, Mom, for everything, especially that. But so that actually saved me staying on the Cape, which was important for me because all of my intelligent, ambitious, driven friends have left Cape Cod because it's so difficult to do what you want to do here. Land is so expensive. There's a major brain drain going on. And it was able to keep me on the land or keep me farming. And I actually had to shrink the footprint of my farm, but I had gotten so good this spring, by this spring, I only was able to set up half of my plot because it takes a little while to set up the farm, build the garden beds. But by May, June of this year, on 0.05 acres, I was producing weekly between 80 and 140 pounds of food, you know, and that is a lot of food. My goal has always been 10,000 pounds a year, you know, because I did the math one time. If 500,000 people in the US grew 10,000 pounds of food a year, every single family, child, adult could eat fresh vegetables every day from a local source, and it would be more affordable. So 10,000 pounds is always my goal. I got pretty close this year. I didn't get it. Next year, I'll smash that goal. But I wouldn't have been able to do it without Putnam. I think the best part about Putnam is this is all I've been talking about since I've been up here, but the fact is there's a lot of people that do want to farm. Food security is a very real issue now. You know, just the nutrition is wildly different from something local, fresh, organic, grown somewhere with a lot of humus in the soil. Makes a huge difference. And we have very, very precious little of it on Cape Cod. You know, it's weird. There's kind of like the two spectrums. You have like the David Lights, or like the much older farmers, and then there's kind of nobody in the middle, and then you got these like 20, 30-year-olds. The older people usually are lucky enough to own land. Most of the people who want to start out farming, they do not have land. The people that have that type of drive, we don't really come from a lot of money. Like it just kind of works out like that, and the Cape is very expensive. Putnam is really the perfect incubator for people who want to get started. And you don't even have to be a full-time farmer like me, but people who want to grow, like Molly, she might be a full-time farmer one day, but she's got, you know, a big girl job managing social media for the Audubon. Wow, seems like a big girl job to me. But she does it because she loves it. She gets bouquets of flowers. She'll give me some vegetables to sell when I'm a little thin, you know. And she gets a lot of fresh food. And you probably grow more than you can possibly eat and give away, right? Yeah, so if you're not a farmer, it's great because you can share with everyone. I mean, Molly's got a kid. She brings her kid there, her friends' kids. It's, you know, very good learning experience for kids just to, you know, see a big carrot get pulled out of the ground. It kind of feeds their imagination, gets them in touch with nature. So Putnam's been great for that. And for me, as a sharecropper, basically what would happen when I would get a plot of land, I've had probably 4 or 5 different areas where I've worked, people's houses. You would just get a field, and there would be like raspberry vines, briars, and I would have to hack through it with a machete, a lawnmower. I would burn it in the winter, do whatever I could to clear it. Putnam's great. It's cleared. They dump compost. You have a water spigot right there. I started on my first farm. I had to carry water from the spigot like 85 yards up a hill in 5-gallon buckets to get going. It was, granted, yeah, it made me really strong. That was great, but it was a lot of work. It took a very, very long time. So Putnam's nicely set up. We get leaf litter, leaf mold, which is a really good soil amendment. We get compost dropped there. We get wood chips, which I don't use, but a lot of people find very helpful. And it's also nice, like, if you need help, somebody holding something, well, like that big trellis that Rick showed you at the bamboo, sometimes you need somebody to hold something, and you can just look around and say, hey, come over here for a second, you know, give them a carrot on their way out, say thank you. So it's nice, and it's really, I think, short of owning your own land, having your own farm, it's really the best place where you could possibly, as a non-landowner, farm. And I think that's what we need. And there's also sort of the exchange of ideas. One of the growers, Aaron Hurst, is like, he's a huge nerd with the science of things. So me and him like to have a lot of conversations just about like interesting things that we're doing. You know, one of the things the main thing I do is hugel beets. So I grow in thick, dense organic matter. Rich had a picture. Essentially, it starts with logs, then brush, and then leaves and seaweed, and then compost. Most people just farm or garden in compost. The reason I do that is because it retains like 70, 80% more water. I don't lose crops to drought. And it was funny, I was talking to Aaron, and he goes, hey, you know what I'm doing? He goes, I'm going into the woods, and I find these broken down logs, and the wood has turned like reddish gold, and I kind of crumble it in the top layer. I said, yeah, I know, Aaron. I've been doing that for like 5 years. So we came to that conclusion separately, but it's interesting. It's stuff like that where you can sort of share tricks with each other and help each other out. I know Molly she's done some gardening, but she had a lot of questions in the spring that I was happy to answer. And it's like, you know, I learned from other people too, but so people have an experiment, you ask them how did it work? It's a great place to exchange ideas. And it's just, you know, it's a great place to meet people, even if you just want to have a picnic or a barbecue. And then on top of that, as an actual farmer, I've met a lot of people from the Cape and in the town of Orleans just walking around. And then they'll say, where can I find you and buy your stuff? And I said, come to the Orleans Farmers Market on Saturdays. And then they show up. One of my best customers is this older woman from the Philadelphia, or from the Texas area, excuse me. She lives here half of the year. And now she comes up. She, I guess, has a big garden, so she likes to ask me questions. But she comes to my stand every week she's in town and buys like 1 to 3 bouquets of flowers, you know? So it's great for us. We're able to get into the community. And in that sense, it's better than having your own farm because you're in a public area, you have the exposure, and it's just good to get people out there. But.
I love hearing those stories. Thank you, Matt. And to wrap it up today, we have one more grower. Matt came with tons of experience. Molly, not so much. However, what she brought was passion and a vision for what she wanted to do with her plot. And from my perspective, the productivity that Matt is looking to extract from his, combined with the community building, educational aspects, nurturing aspects that Molly is looking to combine with hers, is the reason that the more growers you have growing, the more momentum you have. Because everyone does something differently. Everyone has a different vision, but it's all driven by passion for the earth. Molly Sangas.
Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you, Drew C., David, John Janelle, the council, the commission, the epic amount of work and care and detail that went into over a decade of labor that then gave me this extraordinary opportunity to be a grower. And I tell my friends, I won the lottery, I won the lottery. And they're like, you won the $1 billion lottery. I was like, no, I won something better. I was like, I won this amazing farm plot. You can't, it's about the size of this room, a little bit bigger, the farm plot that I was given and for my family. And I have never grown anything in my life before getting this farm plot. I bet about maybe like a basil plant that I soon killed thereafter. I think I only really get motivated by tons of pressure and stress. So this was the perfect amount of land and possibility to really get me excited. And when people come to my farm, we did a little circle up and we said, well, what do we each hold for a vision for what we want to grow here? And my instinctual answer was, I want to grow humans. And how do we combine the experience of farming with human development? And when I came here from California, I grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts, was in California for about 13 years. And in the pandemic, returned to Cape Cod, where my family's had a home for 40 years in Chatham, to be closer to my family and to allow my 3-year-old daughter, at the time, a 1.5-year-old daughter, to have more exposure to her family. That are here in Massachusetts. And in that time, I heard about Putnam Farm through my friend Catherine. She's one of the original 5 plot owners, Catherine and Kian. And we actually met in California, deep in the woods of Santa Cruz, learning about bird language and ancestral skills and primitive skills, and learning how do we connect deeply to nature again? And that's where we were trained in a program called Weaving Earth for many years. And they had come back to the Cape years earlier. They actually met in that program, got married, had babies. Kian's from Brewster, came back here. And they were one of the first plot owners. And Catherine invited me and other moms and other kids to come out during the pandemic to sit alongside her garden plot with our babies and pregnant bellies and all the things, and allow our kids to play together and be safe outside. And we could wander through her plot and eat food. And I remember pulling up these purple majestic tomatoes out of the ground, and I just had never had that experience in my 40 years of life. And I was like, this is incredible, watching the kids pull these potatoes out of the ground. And it honestly felt like, even amidst a pandemic, I felt like it was heaven on earth. Like, I just felt so happy. Like, it was like the air was cleaner. It was like the light shine brighter. It was like everything, like, it was just the most, and like, I don't even know, sparkly time that I can remember during the pandemic. And I was like, that place, I don't know what it is about that place, but I just really want to be there as much as I can. So my daughter was napping. Her name is May Wilder, and she was napping one day, and I happened to drive through Putnam while she was napping and saw that there were new plots that had been developed. And I said, oh, and they rolled in my window, you know, what's going on, you know? And they said, oh, you should get in the lottery. It's coming up in 2 weeks. And I was like, okay. So I went and put our name in the lottery, and it was right past May's birthday, and I was really wishing on a star that we could get a plot, and we got chosen. And then Rick took me on a tour to see all the plots, and I stood in front of plot 12, and I just had this overwhelming feeling of like love pouring off this plot. He said, we really want this to be a demonstration garden. I was like, I'll make a demonstration garden, you know? But again, had to go in the lottery, and just by fate, that was our plot 12. Now, as someone who had never grown anything, I guess I would say I came to it as like very clean slate. So when I got to my plot, it was just one big, you know, packed compost and beautiful. And the only thing I knew that I wanted was I wanted a circle in the middle. You know, I knew how important it was to circle up community and have everyone be able to share that space. So first thing I did was I drew a big circle in the middle. I was like, I'm going to have seats, and this is where kids and families are going to hang out. And then I said, well, I guess I'll just draw these straight lines. You know, everyone else seems to, you know, we're going to run straight crop lines. And so I was like, okay, just do the straight lines. So I started with my stick and trying to draw the straight lines. And out of the woods come all these birds, and they're going, you know, these big cardinals, all these birds are coming in, and they're yelling at me. And I study bird language. You know, I pay very close attention to birds when they alarm. And I was like, and the cardinals reminded me of my ancestors. Like, whoa, they are not happy with what I'm doing right now. So I slowed down. I was like, okay, I got it. Yeah. And I was like, well, okay, what do I really want? You know, like what feels right in my body to do? And I said, I just want this like radiating. I want everything to be circles. I want radiating. I want one big womb, you know, and I want it to just radiate in these like beautiful curved beds. So I started drawing these curved beds, and so it's like a circle and these curved beds that kind of radiate out from there, which my wife really hated. I gotta say, she was like, why can't you just be like everyone else? Can we draw straight lines? Does it have to be always so original? You know, I was like, I don't know, it's just what feels right. But drew these circles, we have radiating beds, and I am so in love with it. It feels feminine, it feels feminist, it feels like a womb, and it just feels like a place where people can come together. Someone said, can I just lie in the middle of your circle and cry? And I said, yes, you can just lie in the middle and just cry if you need to, a place to be nurtured. And, you know, and this plot is way far beyond anything that I can grow for myself, feed my family. So I always knew I wanted other families and community members to be included. So I always invited other families and their kids to come out. We had many days where we would together, the kids would be playing in the dirt and we'd be building the beds. And so we had many, many weekends where I invited kids out, really from 0 to 6 years old, to be on our plot and playing with us. And it's been, you know, and so that vision is continuing to manifest to this day. And right now, we are actually working on a program with the Laurel School, where my daughter goes to school in Brewster. You might be familiar with that school. It's a beautiful, like, toddler to 4th grade institute. And many of the families that I invited to my plot were from the Laurel School. That's really how I got to know a lot of parents. And right now, we had our very first field trip of 4th graders coming out to do some harvesting with us from the Laurel School. And the kids had these backpacks, and they're running around our plot, and we actually planted about 35 different types of vegetables. And let me just rewind for a second before I go into this phase, because so I had never grown anything, and I got the plot, and then I was like, oh my God, I don't know anything about seeds or starts or, how deep does the seed go? How far apart does it go? What do you plant together? So I joked that I did like 1,500 Google searches over the course of April. I just had to research every little thing about what it takes. But it was such an exhilarating challenge. It was actually the only time I've ever experienced insomnia because it was so exciting that I'd be like up in the middle of the night, like, well, the onions go over here and they can go over there. You're like, oh, let me research that. What about this? It was like these intensive downloads on how to, you know, how to think about it that was extremely like, it was even though it took a lot of energy, it gave me far more than it asked. And I loved how much I even learned about each seed, you know, just like for the first time, discovering where food comes from. So I like would learn what the basil seed looks like compared to the calendula seed. The calendula looks like a little octopus arm versus little specks of pepper. And, you know, and how do these enormous plants grow out of such unassuming, you know, tiny forms of life? And that's the kind of thing that I want other people and kids to experience early and often. So we planted all these plants. They flourished beautifully. And we really had a successful garden, and I got to watch all these plants grow and bloom. And I just, even if I was like, I'd love to eat it, but I just was so excited about each plant, what it could look like when it grew into its full form. It was just such a beautiful opportunity to get to know the plants and who they are and how they grow. And so when the kids came on this field trip, you know, I would send them out. Can you find this? Can you find a carrot? You know what a carrot looks like when it's in the ground, you know? And or where are the blueberry plants? And so they would go on these scavenger hunts, really familiarizing themselves with who the food is. Where does the food come from? What does the plant look like? And you should have seen them when we dug up the potatoes. You know, we'd like turn over the dirt, and they were like, it was like they were all grabbing it was like $1 million bricks or something. You know, they were so excited. And then, okay, you got a potato, move out of the way. And the next ones would come in and they grab for them. It was like the thrill for them to just be connected in this way and discover food is so visceral. And it's something that I want as many kids to come into this experience as possible, especially in a time of climate change. Like Matt was saying, you know, we're food security. I think about my daughter, 3, and I'm like, where is she going to be in 50 years? She has got to know how to grow her own food. So all these kids got to know how to grow their own food. If we have food shortages, if they can't get food to come to where they are, they have to be able to survive. So for me, part of it feels like this urgent necessity. So I'm partnering now with the Laurel School, which amazingly, one of the things that I didn't have, I don't have is a greenhouse, and they have an enormous greenhouse on their campus. So in this coming year, the kids are going to plant all the vegetables for our garden at their greenhouse. They can have field trips to come out and plant them and learn all about that. The families can come and farm with us regularly. And then we're going to set up a farm stand that goes back to the school and back into the community. So all the parents can come and pick up and drop off and take home some kale or some greens or tomatoes. So we're going to create this full circle integrated program. And we're also looking at an adjacent property on the Eastham side that could possibly be a location for the Laurel School to set up a summer program that would allow us to integrate farm and forest education into the Putnam property and have kids be located nearby. So this is some of the, as the seeds are planted in all these ways, what may grow. I have so much passion for where the Putnam vision is going to go in terms of like the next plots and all the new people that could be coming in. And I'm really excited about what it's going to be doing for my family. And I just want to give a special shout out to Matt, because it was like pair the senior with the freshman, you know, it was like pair the like college student with the kindergartner when it comes to farming. And so I would literally, he was across the street from me, and I like at every moment be like, hey Matt, can you show me like how to cut the tomatoes? Can you show me how to, is this the potato go this way or that way? You know, what is this thing that just grew? I don't even know, I can't even identify it. And the care and gentleness by which you would like, be like, oh yeah, for sure, let me show you. And he would just take like the next 30 minutes to like show me in detail how it worked, you know, and like really hold my hand through it. And it was such an incredible resource. And I feel so blessed that I've been your neighbor and friend. And again, I know I probably went longer than I was supposed to, but that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
And with that, I know this has been a long class. So thank you. As you can see, there's a lot of passion at Putnam. Come visit, don't be shy. Track me down if you want a personal tour. Happy to do that. Don't forget your prize. And I imagine we need to kind of cut things down unless there's any final words coming from our hosts. Good to go? Well, thank you, everybody. Happy growing.